Now, in any course connected with archaeology, at least the archaeology of the last 2,000 years, we have to have a little bit of history. So I've got to put some history in now to help you understand the transition between the Republic and the Augustan period. Well, the textbook does make the point that we can actually very rarely identify any portrait bust that we do find because they're just the heads, they don't have the names written on them. And remember, Lucius Junius Brutus, the big bronze head, there was just a name that was given to the head when it was found. But we are fortunate in that we have a way of testing the accuracy of these portraits, because by the very last years of the Roman Republic, we start to get coins being issued, coins with portraits on them. In this particular case, a portrait coin of Gaius Julius Caesar, made roughly about 44 BC. We're told that Caesar had a reasonably prominent Adam's apple, that he had a long beaky nose, that he had no hair on the front of his head. It told quite a lot of things about Caesar. So having these coins which match the descriptions allows us to identify certain sculptures as being representations of Caesar. We do get slight differences. This is the famous head from Egypt, now in the Berlin Museum. It really is incredibly beautiful. It's about that high. It's made of a greenish granite, and it's very difficult to get a good photograph. You can't really focus on it in many ways, but it is a beautiful portrait bust. Inset glass eyes, you can see this characteristic Caesar-type hairstyle there. The nose matches up, the slight Adam's apple. We've got the same sort of thing in this bust that's now in the Vatican Museum. He's repeated features of the face, the nose, the Adam's apple, the receding hairline. So we can identify these as being representations of Julius Caesar. What we cannot say is if they were made while Caesar was alive or not. This is always going to be a problem. Well, Caesar is one of the really crucial people to know about in Roman history, because he does manage to take control of Rome. He does change Roman history in many ways. And this is a sequence of events that begins with what we know as the First Triumvirate, which was an informal alliance of the three leading politicians of Rome. Triumvirs means the three men. And these were Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Gnaeus Julius Caesar. What they did was they manipulated the voting system. The voting system in Rome worked in such a way that people voted in blocks according to their benefactor. All these three men wanted something, and they realized that the best way they could get what they wanted was creating an informal political alliance, what we call the First Triumvirate, so that they could use each other to control Rome for their own benefit, controlling public elections. For example, Pompey the Great had just come back from making Syria a province and Cilicia a province, Pontus a province, all sorts of areas in Asia Minor provinces. His enemies said he acted without authority in doing this. They wanted to put him on trial for treason. He wanted to avoid that. Marcus Licinius Crassus, he controlled all the tax collectors in the province of Asia, the western part of modern Turkey. The Roman authorities were trying to cut the amount of money he could get from taxation. He wanted to be rich. In fact, he was the richest man at Rome. Caesar. Caesar comes from one of the oldest Roman families, the Julian family, Julius Caesar, Julius Ascanius. Caesar comes from a family that has no money. He wants money. The best way to win money is to win a war against an enemy and get their gold and silver. So they all want something from each other, and they work together with the First Triumvirate to make this happen. Well, we don't have any idea of what Crassus looks like, but we do have some idea of what Pompeius Magnus looks like. This is a posthumous coin. In other words, the coin was issued after he actually died. It's issued by one of his relatives in his memory, and it shows us the triumvirate, Pompey here, and again we have a portrait that matches a description of the man. In particular, this very raised hairstyle. This type of hairstyle is what we know as the anastola hairstyle. Alexander the Great had one, sort of fluff it up at the front, you see. Now I know I'm long overdue a haircut, because as you know I normally keep my hair much shorter, and one day I will get round to getting one. I'm not trying to get an anastola. Anastola, the sunrise. Where does the name Anatolia come from? It's the land where the sun rises. It's the land in the east. So to Greeks, Anatolia is in the east. Anastole is the hairstyle which Alexander the Great, to make him look more imperious. Well, we know that Pompey the Great modelled himself on Alexander the Great. We take the same name, the Great, the Great. It's this that allows us to identify a couple of portraits of Pompey the Great. This one, probably made sometime after his death. It's not totally Roman verse. What's so funny? I mean, like that. But notice the very small piggy-type eyes. He's described as having piggy-type eyes, small eyes, raised brow, the anastola hairstyle, found in a family tomb of his later member of his family. So reasonably certain it is him. And this is close enough with that anastola hairstyle that we can identify this as Pompey the Great as well. Well, Pompey the Great is important to know about because of architecture more than anything else, Pompey's theatre. Romans, serious people. They don't have fun, they don't enjoy themselves. We don't have portraits and statues. We don't do things like go to the theatre. There shall be no theatre at Rome, the Roman Senate said in the 3rd century BC. Well, it's not quite true, because generals, when they came back from their wars, were allowed to build a theatre, a temporary theatre of wood, and put on shows, gladiatorial shows, theatrical shows, mimes, not serious theatre, something to keep the people happy over a period of time. Well, what Pompey the Great decided to do was build a permanent theatre, to break Roman law and actually build a permanent theatre, to celebrate making Syria a province. The Campus Martius, this big flat area to the northwest of Rome, is where he can build such a thing, and he decides to build his theatre in that particular area there. Well, the textbook gives you an aerial photograph of what's left of the theatre. There's hardly anything to be seen above ground, but it was later converted into a Renaissance palace, the Palazzo Pio, the Palazzo Orsini, and you can just see the theatre shape there, that semicircular theatre shape there. But we are very fortunate that even though there's not much survives, we do actually have a plan of part of it. Fur. Fur is the former Urbis Roma. I'll be telling you more about this a bit later. It's a scale plan of Rome that was made originally under Vespasian and then copied under Severus. And it gives us detailed plans with the name of different parts of Rome. Less than 10% survives. But the parts that do survive allow us to reconstruct the one part of the theatre and to show that there was a big garden attached to it. And then by looking underneath the Palazzo Pio, we can still see these things here. Separate rooms. Well, these are barrel vaults, of course. Barrel vaults built in Opus Reticulatum. This is the earliest dated case of Opus Reticulatum, 63 BC. It may have been used before, we don't know. But here we have Opus Reticulatum used in a barrel vault in Pompey's theatre. Because what makes construction of Pompey's theatre possible on the flat Campus Martius is concrete, the barrel vault, arch, all these things which I talked about in the last class. You can see that in this cross-sectional view, you have the seating area in the Roman theatre called the cavea. You have the imma cavea, the media cavea and summa cavea. I'll give you these terms in another class, so I won't write them down now, but the lower seating area, middle seating area and upper seating area. Well, it's flat. So to provide a seating area like a Greek theatre, which is cut into a hillside, what Pompey's architects have to do is to build this massive concrete structure, but the barrel vault cuts the cost down, makes it strong, makes it all possible. Right, I hear you say, how does he get away with it? Well, it's simple. It's not a theatre, he tells the Roman Senate. It's a temple. It's a temple to the goddess Venus. You see, what Pompey's done is taken the idea of the Fortuna Primigenia temple at Praenesta one stage further. Remember, Fortuna Primigenia, you've got that theatre shape with the temple at the top. This is exactly what he's doing here. This is how he gets away with it. It is, of course, beautifully decorated. We have descriptions of the marble columns. Nothing of this survives. We believe it's 2 stories high. That's what the evidence seems to suggest. With possibly 3 rows of arches. It's really impossible to say exactly what it would have looked like. The key feature being this stairway that goes to the temple. There's a suggestion in one source there may have been 4 other temples around the top as well. So Pompey built this enormous theatre complex, which you can see reconstructed here, with the temple on one end. So he's able to get away with breaking the law. I'm not breaking the law, I'm building a religious building with a religious entertainment area. And then at the one side of it, he builds this open colonnaded garden, which is modelled directly on Hellenistic, Greek-type things. Well, this is a convenient time, actually, just to make the point to all of you who may not be aware of this, the difference between a Greek and a Roman theatre. The word theatre, theatron, means to actually sort of, in a sense, experience something more than anything else. But the characteristic feature of a theatre in the Greek-speaking world for Greek performances is this circular area called the orchestra and this horseshoe-shaped, more than a half circular area, the cavea where the people sit. Greek theatres are designed for a specific type of performance with a very small stage building, because most of the action takes place in this open area, the orchestra, which you can see is fully circular. Greek theatres are cut into the hillside as well. So this is the plan of the theatre at Epidaurus. Roman theatres are something very different. Roman theatres depend on the spoken voice. You need to be able to hear things. Well, it's a bit difficult to do that in an open theatre like this. So in a Roman theatre, what you have is a D shape with the stage building here, a semicircular orchestra. The stage building has a roof on it, so that the sound is projected out. And of course, Roman theatres tend to be built of concrete on flat areas. Obviously, in some places, like in parts of Turkey, you can see a Roman-type theatre built into a hillside. So there are some sort of theatres which are not quite one nor the other. But there is this very difference in emphasis, that in a Greek theatre, the emphasis is on seeing something taking place in the orchestra, not so much hearing things. That comes in a bit later. Roman theatre, the emphasis is on hearing. All this is made possible, and I put this on deliberately to remind you of the importance of the arch, the voussoir arch, the keystone with the voussoirs, this whole series of arches which can be built using centering, a wooden former, to give you barrel vaults which can be annular like this, and we see at Praenesta, or in the case of Pompey's theatre, to provide the whole substructure for the theatre seating area. So Pompey's Theatre is a very particular important building in many ways. Well, the first triumvirate began to collapse in 53 BC, when basically most of the guys involved in it had got what they wanted. Crassus had won control of the East. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, wants even more. He wants military fame. So he sets out with a large army out of the place called Karhi, modern Haran, on the border in Turkey, but on the border with Syria. He's defeated, his head is cut off and sent to the king by Crassus. With the death of Crassus, there's nothing to hold these guys together. Pompey's married, I think, to Caesar's sister's second daughter or something like that. But they all hate each other anyway. So Pompey tries to turn the Roman people against Caesar. In 51 BC, Pompey manages to become single consul of Rome against all the law. Nobody wants to serve with him. Nobody likes him. He's powerful. Well, Caesar's declared an enemy. 49 BC, Caesar marches on Rome. 48 BC, Pompey defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus. He escapes to Egypt, where he was murdered. His supporters, though, continued to fight in different parts of the empire. And I put this on really because most people know that phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Actually, my card's very different. Mine's very different. My card says, what does it say? Veni, Vidi, Vised. Sorry. Time for a bad joke. Yeah, I bought. Okay, but what many people really don't know is most people associate this phrase with Caesar's Gallic Wars. The Battle of Zela in the northeastern part of Turkey. Nothing to do with the Gallic Wars. The war ends with the Battle of Munda in Spain. Caesar declared dictator for a 10-year period. 44 BC, Caesar's declared perpetual dictator of Rome. And 3 months later, the Ides of March, the 15th of March, he's assassinated by Brutus and Cassius and several of the senators. Well, this starts off a civil war. And this civil war is associated with the creation of the Second Triumvirate, which is an official political alliance formed by Roman law with the duty of dealing with the murderers of Caesar. So, and these guys have got full legal power over Rome. Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, who's placed in charge of the East, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, in charge of Africa, Gaius Octavian, later Augustus. He's Caesar's sister's daughter's son. So they're related, but he's not actually directly related to Caesar. But he claims, and everybody accepts his claim, that he was adopted by Caesar. The first triumvirate deals with the murderers of, oh dear, that one got on the wrong place. The first triumvirate manages to deal with the murderers of Caesar quite quickly. And again, we can actually get some idea what these people look like by looking at coins. This is Mark Antony and Octavian. This coin was issued after Lepidus was eased out of power. And notice Lepidus is shown much younger than Mark Antony. He is. Octavian was only about 18 or 20 or so when the second triumvirate is formed. Mark Antony is already in his 40s. Well, Mark Antony likes to rule the Eastern Empire, and you can see his portrait. He shows them always the same. like Crassus, he wants even more military glory. He takes an army into classical Armenia. He claims to win a victory, and that's why you have this coin showing him with the Armenian throne on it. But then he makes the mistake of accepting a visit by this lady here, who sails to Cilicia to see him, a lady called Cleopatra, who Caesar has placed in charge of Egypt. Yes, that's Cleopatra. She doesn't look like Elizabeth Taylor or anybody else, does she? Doesn't look like anybody you see on television. Cleopatra is roughly 35 or so at this time, you know, early 30s, 35 or so. Very good at languages, we know that from different references, a very powerful woman, but certainly nothing like you see in a modern Turkish or other TV series. So they start an affair, and of course we end up with another civil war beginning between Octavian and Mark Antony. Octavian, great-nephew of Julius Caesar, defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. This is one of those key dates in history that you need to remember, at 1453. You know that one? Okay, just testing. 28-27 BC, Octavian establishes a new system of government, the Principate. I know this is boring, but this is something to be aware of, because otherwise you won't really understand what comes next. What is the Principate? It's a system of government in which the domestic and foreign policy of Rome and its empire is directed by a princeps. Princeps, the first person. He is responsible, well, I've written responsible for making all the major decisions. That's not quite true. He's given the first say in any discussion on what should be done. Octavian is the first princeps because he's been consul of Rome the most times. He's the richest man in the Roman Empire. He's got the army supporting him, which always helps. We normally talk about the princeps as the emperor. Sometimes I'll say princeps, sometimes I'll say emperor. System was introduced in the winter 28-27 BC. The Roman people loved it because they saw it would stop civil war. And Octavian's now given the title Augustus. Augustus means something like holy or sacred person, respected person. So we talk about august personality. Incidentally, do you know why there are 28 days in February? Because of Augustus. The month August was named after Augustus, but there were only 29 days in the month of August. The month of July was named after Julius Caesar. July had 31 days. Augustus thought, I can't have a shorter month than Julius Caesar. Where can I get 2 days from? So we took 2 days from the 30 days that were in February and put them into August, so that February only has 28 days, except the leap year, when of course you have 29 days. See? Useless information every class, guaranteed. But interesting to know. Well, in theory, the princeps is the senior representative of the Senate. It's the servant of the Roman people. But in reality, the princeps says, well, I think we ought to do this. Okay, we'll do this immediately, sir. Octavian intends it to be a hereditary institution. He organizes his family and family relationships so that he's got successors in line. Doesn't work out for various reasons. It becomes almost like a monarchy. Constitutional monarchy because he has to technically obey the law, he can't just do what he wants officially. It does bring peace to the Roman people for the next 200 years. There are only 2 exceptions in that time. Civil war after Nero, the civil war after Commodus. Well, Augustus is the person who changes the architecture of Rome, changes the face of Rome. It's said that he claimed he found Rome made of brick and wanted to leave it made of marble. The first part of the statement makes sense to a certain extent if you think that Rome, when he takes power, 30 BC or thereabouts, Rome is still basically a city with lots of mud brick temples. The Capitoline Temple, mud brick and wood. There's still a lot of mud brick buildings all over the place. Concrete is being used, but it's not being used with brick. Did he leave it made of marble? He most certainly did. Just before Caesar died, the Romans discovered to the north of Rome, at a place we call Carrara, their own source of marble. They no longer had to import marble from the Greek islands or from Greece itself. They can get marble within reach of Rome itself. The Romans called this marble lunar marble, after the moon goddess, because it's got a kind of smoky, grey, creamy colour to it. So they thought it was very much like lunar. This is now used for the building of the most important buildings at Rome, sometimes as a facade. So you have a veneer of marble, about that thick, on the front of Opus Cementicium. So yes, he leaves it built of marble, but it's marble with concrete behind. Well, what does Augustus do? He starts off by completing a number of building projects that Caesar had started and never quite got round to finishing. The Basilica Julia, the Curia Julia over there, the Forum Julium up over there, probably the Basilica Aemilia as well. He does this because this is the way in which a Roman shows respect for his family. You finish off what they didn't finish. Well, Augustus is not directly related to Caesar, but he claims he's Caesar's adopted heir. So he's using architecture as propaganda here. You know, I am Caesar's heir. Whatever Caesar promised you, the Roman people, I will complete. So he changes the appearance of the Roman Forum, or rather completes the appearance. He also decides to build a theatre. Caesar had promised to build a theatre to commemorate, to rival Pompey's theatre, but he'd never really got started on building it, and he could only afford a small piece of land there. Well, in honour of Caesar's attempt at building this, Augustus does build the theatre in the same particular place. And this is the theatre of Marcellus. Marcellus is his first son-in-law. Octavian, Augustus, has one daughter, Julia. She's married off to Marcellus in the hope that they're going to produce children, and he will have grandsons who will take over in the future. The theatre of Marcellus is still remarkably well preserved because, rather like the theatre of Pompey, it was incorporated into a Renaissance palace in the 15th or 16th century. And again, except here we've got a much clearer idea what it looks like, because you can see the whole curve of the theatre going around like that. Not quite complete, it does go over there, but you can also see that you've got this rather nice Renaissance palace inside it in the way of good archaeology. Well, this is what it looks like from a distance. Also note, it does rain in Rome. Everybody thinks of La Dolce Vita, the sweet life with gelato every day. It isn't always La Dolce Vita. It does rain, doesn't it? Yeah, see? Yeah, it can be cold as well. Yeah, it's pretty nasty. But anyway, that's what the Theatre of Marcellus looks like. And as you can see, it's incredibly well preserved. The construction details, well, basically we're looking at the same type of thing as Pompey's theatre, but here we have got the evidence very clearly, so we can see, again, the barrel vaults that go around and radially. So you've got radial barrel vaults which support the seating in the cavea, and you can see in these cross sections methods of access by different stairways to different sections. Roman theatres were divided by law into 3 sections, with the women, the poor, the slaves and the children sitting at the very top, the middle class, the plebeian people there, and the senators down there. Women were not allowed to sit in the front of a theatre. The only thing we're missing with the Theatre of Marcellus is clear evidence for what the top looks like. Let's just go back. We've got these 2 rows of arches here, and you can see remnants of Roman architecture higher up, but it's not entirely clear what goes on that top level. It's possible it was another row of arches, an arcade, but it may have been plain, an attic story. It's not at all clear what it's like. What is interesting, though, is that we can see here very clearly the Roman use of Greek architectural elements or design in a Roman building by mixing different features from different buildings. When we look at the facade of the Theatre of Marcellus, it would seem to be, well, it's quite clear that the bottom row here of arches is broadly based on the Doric order from Greek architecture. Here you can just see the volutes, so we were looking quite clearly at the Ionic order of architecture. What was on the top? We don't know. Attic story, arcade, probably Corinthian order. This idea of having different types of architectural order, one level above the other, we refer to it as these superimposed orders, and it makes its first appearance at Pergamum in the early 2nd century BC. But it's something that the Romans take on very happily, and you find it used time and time and time again in Roman architecture. Well, the big building that we associate with Augustus transforming Rome from a city made of brick into one of marble is this one over here. Correct name, the Forum Augustum. A forum, the Latin equivalent, the Roman equivalent to a certain extent of the Greek agora. The agora, the political meeting place officially, but market area as well. Augustum, the Forum of Augustus. This is the Roman Forum. This is the political centre of Rome. Caesar's buildings on either side. Caesar also built this, which is the Forum Julium. And what Augustus does is to build one more next to it there. The basic plan of both of these fora is influence from the Greek-speaking world. You've got the colonnades around an open space, but with a temple at one end. You've got the same type of idea in Pompeii. You've got a very large open forum with a temple at one end. But what we find with the Forum of Augustus is really an amazing piece of architecture that combines elements of Greek and Roman architecture for propaganda purposes. Propaganda. Architecture as propaganda, architecture to give you a message. Here we have a plan. The open courtyard here, colonnades on either side. Now these colonnades were filled with statues of the great men of Roman history. Fictitious statues, representation to a certain extent. On the one side they led you to this semicircular area here, an exedra. The idea of the exedra comes from the Greek-speaking world, but in this case it's got a half dome over the top. It's partly covered. In this exedra, you've got a statue of Romulus and the other great men of Rome. Well, Romulus, the founder of Rome. The other colonnade, the great men of Roman history, that leads you into an area where you've got the kings of Alba, the original Latium, famous members of the Julian family, and a statue of Aeneas. So what Augustus is doing with the Forum of Augustus, he's presenting a political story, a history if you like. You come in here and you go, oh look, oh that's so-and-so, oh know about him. Oh yeah, and here's Romulus, the founder of Rome. Oh look who's over there, Aeneas, the original founder of the Roman people, with all the Julian family. Julius Caesar, Augustus, he's a member of their family as well. Everything's directly tied in to pass on this message. At the very end of the forum, you have this enormous temple built entirely of lunar marble. This is the temple of Mars Ultor. Mars Ultor means something like the Avenger. The Avenger, the person who gets revenge, who punishes somebody for harm that they've done. All gods and goddesses come in different forms, but this is Mars Ultor. This is a slightly better idea of what this would have looked like. Well, by having this temple dedicated to Mars Ultor, it's not terribly well preserved today, as you can see. You can see the wall that separates the forum area from the suburbs of Rome there. This is very much, again, full of political messages. We know that Augustus, when Octavian, had promised to build a temple to Mars if he managed to defeat the assassins of Caesar, which he does at the Battle of Philippi. I have to check my battles now. Yes, Battle of Philippi. So this temple is Augustus' thank you to Mars for being able to defeat the assassin. But Mars is, by tradition, the lover of Rhea Silvia, who is the mother of Romulus. All right? Romulus is the founder of Rome. Okay? Romulus is a direct descendant, on the female side, from Julius Ascanius, the Julian family. Mars is also associated with Venus. Where does Venus fit in? Venus is the mother of Aeneas. Aeneas is the father of Julius Ascanius, the ancestor of the Julian family. So both Romulus and Aeneas and Mars are all tied together in part of a complex political message here to make this point that Venus, the mother of the Julian family, it helps emphasize the role of the Julian family in the history of Rome. The third connection is that this particular temple is specifically associated with a diplomatic victory over the Parthian people in the year 20 or 19 BC. The Parthian people were the people who defeated Crassus at the Battle of Carrhae. The Battle of Carrhae was where more Roman soldiers had died than in the previous 200 years. Mars Ultor. Rome, with the help of Mars, will get revenge on any attacks on Rome. So you see, the whole forum complex does tie in quite a lot of different messages. When you get into fourth year, you can have a 2-hour class on it if you like. Oh, no, thank you. Oh, okay. So here it is. Not an awful lot surviving it today. These beautiful columns along the front. This is octo style. And you all remember what octo style means? Unatia. Come on, count in Greek. Yeah, 8. Octo style. 8 columns along the front of this particular one. So that's the Forum of Augustus and its very heavy political message. When he becomes princeps, that's when he starts work on that particular structure. The same year, he starts building another big political statement. On the north end of the Campus Martius, he starts the building of the mausoleum of Augustus, the family tomb for the Augustan family. The idea of building this, which is 87 meters in diameter, is partly to improve the park area, but basically to build something that dominates the main public space in Rome, the Campus Martius. You cannot get away from seeing the mausoleum of Augustus wherever you are. Well, this is how it looks like now. You can see that central circular part there. Originally all this covered with barrel vaults. I'll show you a plan in a moment. It's 87 meters from one side to the other. The facade at the entrance area, this was originally covered with lunar marble. The other parts fit with a different type of stone. But as you can see, it's good concrete architecture, lovely concrete architecture, designed as a family tomb, not just for Augustus, but with also for all the other members of the family that were buried there. And we know that all the emperors until the time of Nero, who died in 98, were buried inside there. They were cremated, their bodies were burnt and placed inside the mausoleum of Augustus, but also all the relatives, slaves and freedmen. Barrel vaults. You're beginning to get the impression I love barrel vaults, aren't you? Yeah, I like barrel vaults. I'm totally in favour of barrel vaults. The central part, this circular section here, not quite clear how the whole thing would have looked like, but it's thought that that central section originally rose a lot higher above the side wall. We know we've got barrel vaults here. There's a reference to this being a garden. So it seems likely it was covered with earth. It had trees growing on it, a kind of circular tumulus on the top with a statue of Augustus at the very top. Model, broadly speaking, on the tomb of Caecilia Metella, mentioned in a textbook. Another view of it there. And I think I'll stop at that point. Okay. Thank you. All right, now I know where we are. I'm beginning to get there now.